Hi everyone. So I'm going to talk you through our biodiversity notes, just like we would talk through our notes in class. If you've checked in Classroom or have looked at your tic-tac-toe board, you'll see that in box number 5, the going through the notes and filling in the guided notes sheet is the required assignment for this week. And you can check out my other video that explains that particular assignment. But let's just jump right into our notes. So we're looking at biodiversity. When we look at biodiversity, we're looking at the definition, the variety of organisms in a given area, the genetic variation within a population. So if you have a lot of organisms, just how genetically similar or different are they from one another? The actual variety of species within a community, and then how many communities are within an ecosystem. So if you recall back, we had community and ecosystem as two of our definitions. We looked at starting with a species, then at a population, community, and then an ecosystem. We do see some areas of our planet, tropical rainforests are a great example where we have so many different species of organisms. And then if we look at other biomes like a desert biome or a tundra biome, we're going to see a lot fewer species, and therefore our diversity numbers are going to go down. It's important that we, as people, though, understand diversity amongst all of the species for our own survival. If we start to disrupt the biodiversity within a particular ecosystem, it can have ramifications for us as well. Now, when we look at all of the species that are on the planet, and we've cataloged them, and we've had scientists look at insects and mammals and reptiles, we know that there are about 1.7 million different species on Earth, and most of them are actually insects. However, the actual number of species on Earth is unknown. So the 1.7 million is really our best guess based on the organisms we've been able to encounter. But scientists do know that there are places on Earth, the deep sea, if we go to the bottom of like hydrothermal vents, where there are organisms that we have yet to discover. Okay. So we see here just a nifty little graph kind of looking at the number of different species in the thousands. That we know. So the orange that is at the top or the left part of your graph is the total known, and then we have the total estimated as well. So based on how many we know in each category and kind of the areas of the world that we have yet to uncover, we know that we have quite a ways to go. If you look at the bacteria is almost all light yellow because we know that we haven't come close to discovering all of the different species of bacteria. Okay. So when we talk about our new species, as soon as something is identified, we do collect a sample, we describe it scientifically, we put it into a category so that we can kind of study and look at, again, the biodiversity on our planet. Okay. So we do look at levels of diversity, species diversity, ecosystem, and genetic diversity. When we talk about species diversity, we are looking at the difference between populations of species as well as between different species. Okay, and then ecosystem diversity is a little bit different. We're looking at the variety of habitats, the different communities, different ecological processes, which organisms are utilizing the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle. Okay, so those are all things we look at with ecological processes. When we look at genetic diversity, we are looking at the genes contained within all members of a population. So hopefully from biology, we know a gene is a segment of DNA that's located on a chromosome, and it codes for a very specific hereditary trait. When there are problems in our genetic code, that's when we start to see some genetic abnormalities and different kind of, not diseases, but different iterations within, our eye color, our hair color, things like that when we have disruptions in our genetic code. So the benefits of biodiversity, we look at the stability of ecosystems and the sustainability of population. So again, we are counting on healthy ecosystems to ensure a healthy biosphere. So we look at, again, water cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, carbon cycle. Everything has to play its own role. We know that we are major contributors to the disruption of the carbon cycle with our release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So that's actually one of the things that we look at is how are we disrupting biodiversity by doing that? When we look at any particular species, very closely, we look at its specific role that it plays. So we say it either is dependent on or dependent upon by at least one other species in ways that are not always obvious. So think about you within a food web. What organisms do we depend on? And are there any organisms that depend on us? We might not think of organisms that depend on us, but there are some organisms that we don't necessarily think about. So I think maybe in one of the classes we mentioned skin mites. Skin mites live on your skin and they eat your dead skin cells. So that particular organism does depend on you. It might not be obvious, but it is a dependent relationship. Okay. So when we talk about this connection to our ecosystems, we talk about keystone species. Okay, so we see the definition there, a species that is critical to the functioning of the ecosystem in which it lives because it affects the survival and abundance of many other species in its community. So an example of this would be the sea otter. Okay, so the loss of the sea otter populations led to an unchecked sea urchin population, which ate all the kelp, leading to the loss of kelp beds along the US Pacific coast. Okay, the sea otter was responsible for eating the sea urchin. The sea urchin then was responsible for eating the kelp. But when we decimated the sea otter population, and that was something that we did by disruption of habitats, the sea otter population declined, and therefore the sea urchin population increased because there was nothing there to eat it. With more sea urchins, they ate more kelp, and then we had a loss of kelp in the kelp beds along the US Pacific coast, which can have ramifications then in the underwater community. Okay. When we talk about genetic variations, we want to have a particular genetic variation because it increases the chances that members of the population may survive environmental pressures or changes. I know for a fact that the Philadelphia Zoo breeds gorillas, and they have a computer system that maps the genetic code of all of the gorillas within the zoo populations around the country, and actually even some zoos in other countries in the world. And they keep track of which gorilla is mating with which other gorilla, and there are certain genetic lines of gorillas that they no longer will allow to mate and produce offspring because their genetic code is just too rampant in the gorilla population. When we talk about population survival, we look at what happens when a population shrinks. Its genetic diversity decreases. So that's actually what we're seeing with that gorilla population, as though it's passing through a bottleneck. So we can see on that graph that, we kind of pass through that bottleneck. So even if it's able to increase again, there's going to be inbreeding. Again, that's what's happening with our gorilla population. And therefore, they're limiting some strains because they want to make sure that if we're using that graph, that not all the gorillas are in the green genetic line, because once you inbred an organism too many times, you actually will cause genetic malformations, and we see genetic diseases. When we talk about medical and industrial uses, about 1/4 of all the drugs prescribed in the US come from plants. Almost all of them are from fungi when we talk about our antibiotics. So it's essential that we discover new species, but also that we allow the species that we currently have that we're currently using to flourish and that we're not overusing them. Okay, here's some medical uses. So you guys can take a second and look at all of these things. Okay, we also have agricultural uses. Okay, most of the crops produced around the world originated from a few areas of high biodiversity, and we do have hybrid crops. When we take genetic material from one population and cross it with genetic material from another population, because if we depend on too few plants for food, it's really risky. So we want to make sure that we have, even within our agricultural species, a number of different genetic varieties so that we don't wipe out a specific crop with a specific genetic code with a disease. Okay, and here's some agricultural uses of some of our food. Okay, in terms of ethics, aesthetics, and recreation, okay, some people just for ethical reasons believe we should preserve our biodiversity, that all organisms have a right to exist, and that no one organism has more of a value in our world, in our diverse species world that we have. No one organism has a right over another organism. We tend to kind of do things for our aesthetic that are aesthetically pleasing. So we keep pets, we pick flowers, we go camping, we watch wildlife, and hopefully we're not interrupting that wildlife. we look at something called ecotourism, and that's tourism that supports conservation and sustainable development of ecologically unique areas. So this would be if we go camping, but make an effort to not really disrupt the environment by leaving trash and, clearing out whole areas for our campsites, that we're trying to kind of keep nature the way it is and just exist in the way that it's being provided for us. Okay. And at the end of this, we have a wild classroom video link that you can click on. So I hope you found this interesting, and you were able to follow along with your notes. And hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.